Future Now Show. Brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam.
Hey Futurists, Miss Metaverse here, and welcome back to the Future Now Show brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam. We have a great show for you today. Joining me from Sydney, Australia is renowned futurist Brett King, author of international best-selling book, Augmented, Life in the Smart Lane, and Bank 4.0, which is set to release in the coming weeks ahead. Hi Brett, thank you for joining me today.
I guess I should give you the traditional greeting from Australia, which is, g'day, mates. Glad to be with you, Katie.
Oh yes, you're back in Oz for a short while, and you've gone full Australian.
Yeah, it doesn't take much.
All right, let's get down to these questions. So, you've primarily written in the banking space, but your most successful book to date was the General Futurist piece. So what makes banking futurism different from general futurism?
I guess, when you're talking about futurism, it's the same regardless. The way to look at trends, the art of prediction, from those trends, their logical conclusion, all of that's the same. But within the banking space, you do need to use some specific terminology that works for those in the banking sector. And also there are elements structurally that are a little different. Of course, the underlying disruption that we're seeing as a result of technology across multiple industries, it's generally the same trends we're seeing in banking. But there's a few interesting pieces around the regulation of banking that in heavily regulated industries, they can be a little bit more robust when disruption comes along. But generally, the framework for being a good futurist in banking is just being a good futurist.
That's right. Your new book, Bank 4.0, comes out in a few weeks from now. But that is, I understand, sort of the third book in a series. You wouldn't exactly call it a trilogy, but what was the sequence behind the three books?
So the first book, Bank 2.0, actually came out in 2009, but the ideation for that book happened a lot earlier. Actually came from a project I did within HSBC back in 2005. When a guy there that headed up digital at the time, it was before it was called digital, they used to call it e-services back then. Very internet focused in those days. His name was Peter Brooks, and he commissioned me the end of 2005 to write this report on what the next 15 to 20 years at HSBC would look like as a result of technology adoption and how that would change the business. So how it was going to change the retail banking, wealth management, commercial banking, those sort of things, and how quickly these changes were going to be seen. So I put together this group of people from around the world, and we sort of attacked that. But as I got on the road with Peter and Paul Thurston, who was the head of retail at the time, sponsored the project, and started going to HSBC, having these conversations, there was this sort of collective denial of, how internet was going to change the business, and let alone talking about mobile and social media at the time. So Bank 2.0 came out of that sort of frustration and was really about attacking, that cycle represented by internet and how customer behavior was changing, and sort of extrapolating that from a technology perspective. And in 2007, obviously, the iPhone came along. By 2012, when I wrote Bank 2.0, it was very clear that mobile first was having impact. We started to see the cycle with new startups emerging specifically on top of mobile to differentiate, and very different business models and economics from traditional players. And social media, companies Venmo and so forth using social. So 2.0 is really about this mobile first revolution. And Bank 4.0 extends on that, looking at the long-term future of banking and financial services, another 30 years or so. And what are the trends we see now when, as we see the introduction of artificial intelligence, personal voice AIs, augmented reality smart glasses, autonomous vehicles, IoT, all of those things, how is that structurally going to change banking? And where are the patterns we're starting to see emerge out of countries like China and, like the African continent that, inform these changes as opposed to what we sort of see developing in the West. So, but this is pretty much us thinking. So, I'm a little sad in that respect, but I feel like I've written everything I sort of can write in this space.
Well, never say never. There may be another banking book in the future. You never know. In Bank 4.0, you delve into first principles design philosophy. Why did this appeal to you as the foundation of your new book?
So, Katie, as a futurist, we do a lot of study of what happened in the past to try and understand how the future is going to change. So, when you look at the most disruptive technology innovations throughout history, a lot of them are really based on what we call the first principles design philosophy, which is really taking a particular function of the economy, using new technology to completely disrupt that industry or sector through first principles thinking. That is, starting from scratch, saying, let's rethink this industry from the ground up based on this new tech that's emerged. So, the printing press is a good example of that. The telegraph line is a good example of that. The automobile, Daimler and Benz, when they came up with the automobile patent on the same day in different economies, that's an interesting one. But of course, when you have, if you take the telegraph as an example, the first transcontinental telegraph line in the United States was laid and completed in October 1861, and the dominant form of communication to get comms from the east to the west at that time was the Pony Express, and the Pony Express survived only like 3 days after the telegraph line, and then they were out of business. So that's disruptive first principles thinking of communications. Then you have the automobile comes along, and it's not a faster horse, as Henry Ford used to joke. It's a rethink of transportation. But the implications of moving from horse-bound carriages to now motorized vehicles significantly started redesigning cities to cater for vehicles. We needed gas stations to give people access to petroleum or gasoline to fuel the cars. We needed road laws. We needed licensing. So much flowed from that disruptive tech. So when you look at first principles disruption, they tend to be the biggest disruptions historically. 2 examples in modern time, obviously the SpaceX rocket, which is a rethink of rocket technology, dramatically changing the cost of space transportation, and the iPhone. The iPhone wasn't an iteration on the Nokia banana phone or the Motorola Flip or the BlackBerry Rim. It was starting from scratch. Now every phone looks like the iPhone, and every phone platform works like the Apple ecosystem because that first principle rethink really different things. So I was interested to see if in banking and financial services whether there was evidence of this first principles thinking emerging around the world, and I found tons of it when I looked. But that essentially means that the old model of the bank branch, where you go to get access to a bank account, signing a piece of paper to get a physical artifact, that fundamental model is going to be quickly undermined by these first principle approaches that are emerging.
Very interesting. When we look back at banking in 50 years, what will we identify as the key elements that got us there?
That's a good question. I think obviously the internet is going to be a consideration, but the internet will just, be considered sort of a part of that. I do think Steve Jobs with the creation of the iPhone, give him props for that. It is going to, what it does do, the mobile sort of first approach to this really separates the functional experiential access to financial services day to day from the physicality of banking that we've had in the past. So if you look at it on a spectrum, sort of XY spectrum, and X is friction and Y is distribution. So you have digital distribution versus physical distribution, and you have high friction engagement in a branch that requires a lot of work to very low friction, low latency engagement through the technology layer. We've been going on this curve like this, right? So towards digital distribution, very low friction banking. So you follow that through to its ultimate end, and you get instantaneous access to financial services when and where you need in a low friction environment. But mostly the thing that pushed us towards that digital distribution and the expectation of real-time ability to solve the problem, because now we have a phone anywhere, and we're frustrated that we don't get that instant gratification. Now, it obviously started with the internet. But the phone really accentuated that. So I think, definitely we'll look back at Steve Jobs. But the other thing will be, we'll actually look at the way money and so forth is changing itself as a result of digitization.
Is there a difference in the way that millennials or Gen Z, the so-called digital natives, deal with money decisions? You actually find that the millennials and Gen Z have less of a planning mentality. They have less of a horizon in terms of their view of financial services. They're more risk adverse because of having come through the financial crisis early in their lifetime. This is actually quite interesting. The financial crisis is going to define the way millennials and Gen Zs use credit the next 50 years, and come after them. If you look at the effect that depression had on people's banking habits for the next 40, 50 years, a lot of people would say, well, I've got to have a bank or a branch close to my home, because if there's a run on the bank, like there was in the Depression, at least to go down there and yell at someone and get my money. So, people wouldn't have thought about banking remotely and things like that in the 50s and 60s because they were still concerned about the potential for a run on the bank. I know I'm getting off track a little bit, but millennials are going to be, what we're going to see is millennials are going to use credit less. They're going to be more focused on less focused on building assets for long-term wealth as their parents were, less disciplined around that because they don't have the financial education and financial literacy, but more inclined to use tools to manage their money, look for automated solutions to that, and less tied to asset structure. So they probably won't own, most of them won't own their own home, or have that as their aim. I'm seeing them willing to trade off that sort of asset ownership for experiences, and the sharing economy is contributing to that as well with new models which you don't have to have ownership of assets needed in the past of did. You just share access to them, like the bigger and things like that. And there's a lot of debate going on right now economically around whether the trade war with China is a good thing, around Trump's decision to prop up an old coal instead of solar. There's a lot of different decisions being made. Where do you weigh in on the structural elements of all this, economically speaking?
I don't know if you saw the video that Arnold Schwarzenegger posted. I thought it was quite good that he talked about the decision by Trump's administration to support coal. He compared it with Blockbuster. That if during the internet disruption of Blockbuster, if someone had come out and said, "No, you must rent videos there'll be no downloads. That you just, just sort of it'd be a really stupid decision. So he called coal the blockbuster of the energy sector, which is a pretty good illustration. China last year invested, billions in solar infrastructure. They installed 96 gigawatts of solar last year in 2017. That's the equivalent to the entire US install base over the last 40 years. They did it in 1 year. They abruptly stopped new coal plant production a few years ago for the same reason. They saw what was coming. And so you have this really interesting situation. Australia as an economy, as a small economy, where I am right now, has been very dependent on coal. And a few years ago, they had a prime minister, it's the leader of the country in Australia, very much like Trump, very pro, the traditional incumbent industries, actually came out and said coal is good for humanity. His name was Tony Abbott. And so a lot of the policies were really focused on embedding coal and continuing to support coal, because their thinking was China was going to buy a lot of coal for the next 30 years, and so they needed to keep this infrastructure at the top of the Australian economy. Of course, China's for coal leveled off and started to drop, and it changed the dynamic. But here in Australia today, they pay 32 cents per kilowatt for coal-generated electricity. And to put that in perspective, the US pays about 7 cents per kilowatt. So it's a very, very different. That's US coal, 7 cents per kilowatt. But China is now looking at paying 2 cents per kilowatt for generated electricity. Over the next few years, that's going to halve and then some. So you have a situation where China, with their dramatic shift to solar, could be paying a fraction of the cost, 1/10 or less of the cost that, say, Australia and the US is paying for their energy. You just can't compete on that basis. So there is structural changes, but of course the bigger structural changes will be around smart infrastructure, automation, AI, and that's bound to be even more disruptive. And we need clear policy setting to be able to get us to that future state, and just reinforcing the traditional incumbent industries is not a long-term solution. That it's going to be damaging the economy on a long-term basis, and we need to start thinking about the future.
Absolutely. Last but not least, what's next after Bank 4.0?
So obviously I'm interested in this intersection of this technology change and policy, and so I'm going to be working on a sequel to Augmented. The working title for this is The Rise of Techno-Socialism right now. I'm working on this with an economist, a friend of mine out of Hong Kong. But the core concept of this is, as technology starts to change the structure of capital markets. 50 years ago, the S&P 500 was led by companies that converted raw materials into goods and services. So General Motors, GE, Philips, these sorts of organizations. Of course, there was the banks in there as well, but they were really about taking those raw materials through the manufacturing process and distributing them. But today, 5 of the top 10 companies on the US stock exchange are all technology companies. You've got the FANGs, as they call them, like Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, and so forth that are there. In China, it's BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. They're the top technology companies. But they have a very different conversion method. They're dealing in data and information commodity rather than physical commodities that are converted. And as a result, they require a much lower employment levels to convert that into profit for the market. So, when Instagram was acquired, 14 staff members for $1 billion. Kodak had just gone out of business with 140,000 employees, with a market cap 1/4 of Instagram. So this is a structural change in respect to the way markets operate. But that pooling of wealth in technology companies from increasing levels of automation And then on the opposite side, people being displaced, like at the start of the Industrial Revolution, losing their jobs to AI and robots and so forth, creates a potential for massive social unrest unless we have a policy-based approach to fixing this. So this book is really looking at that problem, how as a society and from a government policy perspective, we can mitigate the risk of these tectonic shifts in the way the economies will operate. And how us as humans individually will adapt to not having to work 9 to 5 to survive like we have in the past when AI has automated a lot of the stuff that we can work less, and how the society will deal with that. So that's the next project. Pretty interesting, pretty exciting for me.
Pretty exciting indeed. I can't wait to read that one. Okay, so thank you very much for joining today. I look forward to having you on again in the near future, I hope. And
it was great to, last time we collaborated, of course, was on Breaking Banks. We came on and I interviewed you. So on the podcast, and goes out on the New York AM band, obviously, and syndicated on AM. So it's great to finally get to work together again.
Yes, and if you want to check out that episode, go to breakingbanks.com and you'll find my interview. And so where can we find out more information about your upcoming book, Bank 4.0?
So go to Amazon, check out Bank 4.0. You can search on YouTube, Bank 4.0, obviously, and find out some of the discussions I've had on the book. But yeah, check it out on Amazon and wherever good books are sold, as they say.
Great. Well, thank you again for joining today, and I look forward to having you on next time.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks. Bye.